Welcome. Almost said good morning, but depends on where you're at in the world, of
hmm
course. Good to see you all. So we're a minute past, but we'll have a bunch more folks joining, obviously. Um, Wanted to say from the get-go here, having this in the format of a panel discussion, instead of being a training or learning about a specific, flavor of AV over IP or anything like that, people are going to be telling their stories from the trenches, and there's a good chance that brand names will come up. People might name names, so normally we try to shy away from that. Just know and understand that it might be part of the conversation today, and it's not an official position of ETC or an endorsement or favoritism or anything like that. It's just us giving testimonials and hearing what's happening at our peer institutions. So um, give us that if you will. I'm Jim Spencer. I'm the host today along with Steve Bogart. We will go back and forth with asking questions and try to get some conversation. Joining us, we've got a nice panel. We've got Jeff Levesque from the University of Rhode Island, Raj Singh from USC, Mike Pedersen from Iowa State, and Jonathan Moore, who's a technical trainer at QSC or QSYS. So that's who we'll be getting all of our answers from today. And wanted to start with just kind of a state of the union. If each school doesn't mind, tell us where you're at in that progression, that continuum between traditional AV and 100% AV over IP. Where are you? What's the roadmap? How's it going? So, Jeff, I guess I'll pick on you first. Tell us about what you're doing on campus and where you're at.
Sure. We're in the process of moving to full AV over IP. We have been on that journey since 2020. I actually haven't installed a traditional classroom in a while now. We're about maybe a third of the way there. Our budget doesn't go as far as we'd like. Everyone has budget crunches right now. Um, so, but I am only specifying AV over IP solutions now. All of our AV over IP that we install, I only install it as an island on my campus. I don't run on the converged network. My networking team couldn't handle that. I have multiple switches on my campus that are old enough to have graduated college by now. So I can't even think of running AV over IP on my campus network. So that means every space I set up, I am going ahead and spinning up my very own network, which actually is really nice. That means if I want to go troubleshoot a classroom, I actually know where everything is living on the network. I know its IP. I can set up every system identically. So it makes actually troubleshooting for me a little bit easier.
That's really great.
So
Is there a spot in the roadmap where you'll reach not the singularity, but you might own more networking switches than networking does?
we're getting there pretty quickly.
That'd be interesting to
So
hear about how that works.
yeah.
So let's move then to Iowa State. Mike, can you tell us about what you've got on campus and where you're at in that roadmap between traditional to all IP?
Yeah. Hey everyone, Mike Pedersen, Iowa State. Yeah, so we got two full buildings that are completely AV over IP now. Well, largely AV over IP. Many of you toured the Student Innovation Center here on campus a year ago. That building is very significantly using AV over IP for transmission throughout. And then we have for our football team, we have what's called a Stark Performance Center. And that building is pretty much completely AV over IP as well. We've done it a couple of different ways. As far as the networking goes, the Student Innovation Center is generally converged. Although we're learning new things about that all the time. We were told all along that it was converged, and then we've got recent information from the networking team that maybe it wasn't so much. So a little curiosity going on there. But it's on shared network switches, right? We're not on dedicated network switches, but they may, from a converged perspective, pretty put us on a VLAN pretty hard, it seems like. So converged, yes, no. How do you define that, right?
Yeah.
Um, uh, but for the Stark Performance Center, those are all dedicated network switches, right? That are AV over IP only throughout. And then, yeah, so it's working pretty well both ways. We do have some challenges. Um, we're having to use some older firmware with our solution in the Student Innovation Center, where it's more converged because they would not allow us to do some QoS that was
Mm,
really necessary. And so we basically got kind of a semi-custom firmware from our manufacturer that we're running, which is, as that ages, as we call for help, the help desk is like, hey, click on this button. And we're like, that button doesn't exist on our screen, right? And so, we were just having conversations this week or last week about, okay, what do we need to do to basically come up to speed on all that, right? So that'll be a conversation that we're going to have over the next few weeks. So,
that's
Hey,
fun.
Mike, I'm curious. Do you guys work, or does your AV team work for IT, or how converged are the AV and IT team on your campus?
we're very converged. Yeah, so we work for IT services. You know, the IT team, just down the hall here, in my same building, right? And so we cross paths all the time. Um, it was kind of interesting when we first were talking network for that building, and we were saying, hey, we're going to do AV over IP. And I was talking to the network team, and I'm like, hey, we need to have a meeting. We're going to have a whole bunch of bandwidth on that network. And they're like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, Mike. And I'm like, no, I don't think you understand. Um, then they're like, no, don't worry about it, right? And so I finally pushed them hard enough. They're like, okay, fine, we'll have a meeting, right? And so we got, the manufacturer on the phone and their experts and our team and our network team and got them all in a room, and we talked through all the very nitty-gritty specific network requirements and bandwidths and details, and the network team's like, yeah, it'll be fine, right? And so, um, and generally speaking, at least from a bandwidth perspective, it has absolutely been fine, right? So I think there was a little bit of oh ye of little faith from my network team, right? On the quality of the network they maintain, but it's actually been really good. So
At least you proved that you knew what you were talking about and were speaking their language and came to
right,
them with the requirements.
right, yep,
That's huge.
yep.
Cool. Well, we're moving from the East Coast to the West Coast. Raj, tell us about USC and where that's at, what it's been like over time, and what things look like for you today.
Absolutely, Jim. So, hey guys, Raj with USC. I know most of you guys, but in terms of, as you guys may know, I mean, we do run a highly converged AV over IP network right now at USC. That's been the case since about 2019, 2020 is when we started that process. One thing for us that's been key is the fact that we are central IT. So that's been my peer is the director of network engineering. So we have a good working a relationship as well as with the security team and things like that. What's interesting for us is prior to us going down this path of AV over IP on a converged IP network, like network and security. I had no idea like what AV is. It's on its own island. There's some guys out there on campus pushing projectors around. Now with the fact that, with a lot of these being quantified, they're part of the process and procedures of normal IT operations, network operations, security operations, and the presence and the scope and scale. Because what's interesting for us is we're AV, but at USC we manage the space, so we're also campus. We also do access control, things like security cameras. So all that gets lumped into what we're doing. So it's a significant scale that we have across campus. I mean, we are running everything on the converged IP network. There is no segregation. The only segregation is IP based with VLANs. In terms of how we have broken it down. We have two major campuses, and per building, per building there's a VLAN. In terms of what we've been doing, I mean, we've been able to scale that out across both campuses right now. And since last year, when we were at Iowa, we have spun up a bunch of new locations and buildings as well. A new School of Dramatic Arts that's running fully on the AV over IP Converge network. Our new football practice facility, our new baseball stadium, lacrosse stadium, a lot of our athletic facilities right now that we have. The Coliseum, that's been running on that as well. The Galen Center, which is a basketball arena. We brought that into the AV over IP Converge network for not just video, but also for audio with things like Dante. We've already maxed out our Dante domain manager server based on the number of endpoints we have. So we are looking to spin up multiple different versions of that as well right now. But in terms of feedback has been tremendous. I mean, the network has been resilient enough where we can run that on it without an issue. And because access control, a lot of critical systems run on the network, my key takeaway with that has always been like, they're going to be calling a lot more other people first before they call the AV guys if the network is down. And that adage has usually helped us a lot. And one of the big things that's really worked well for us is the fact that we've given a lot of other teams impetus and reasons to push for upgrades that they would need, whether on the network or the security side. In addition, a lot of capabilities that did not traditionally exist are available right now because it is AV over IP. Like, as an example, in the football practice facility that we're building, I mean, it's a massive building. The coach wants to be on the field and be able to bring up plays and do everything and control everything. Because it's AV over IP, we can do a lot of those things right now. So those kind of little like quality of life improvements have added up tremendously for us in terms of not only from a support side, but also from a user side as well, too. Where to the point now it's accepted almost, where they're like, well, yeah, well, why would I not be able to do that? Like, what do you mean I can't do this over here? Because I mean, even like, the thing is the simple things like even the phone systems, right? I mean, those are over IP now. Everybody has a Zoom phone, which is on their iPad or iPhone, and they can answer their calls from anywhere. So that expectation in terms of, well, if I can do that, then with AV, then why can't I just send this over there or bring something else here? So the acceptance for that has been tremendous. And, we've looked to expand this out to other schools within USC as well, on the medical side, the hospital side, and we've had a lot of success to the point where we don't have the ability to keep up with the rooms they want us to take over because we're not been given headcount. They're like, well, you guys are doing a great job. Take over these rooms as well. I'm like, no, let's wait on that. Just because we have the technology to do it doesn't mean we have the manpower to do it as well, too. So in some ways, we're a victim of our own success with AV over IP. I think you're muted, Jim.
Sure.
Sorry, little latency and parity issue there. No, that's a good story to tell. So Jonathan, if we switch over to you from QSC perspective, you obviously work with customers, from all different types, from all over the world, and are helping them solve their problems and right all the wrongs in the world. I feel like one of the first questions that people ask when they're looking at AV over IP, one of the decisions they make, and we heard responses to both effects. Do you do an island network, or are you on your campus's commodity network? Are you isolated, or are you all in and you're connected with everything? Can you lay out some of the thought process and the decision making that people go through to, obviously either one could be the right answer, but we want to make sure that we have the right information, that we're making that decision for the right reasons. Can you lay that out for us?
Yeah, great question. So there's a few things that I ask when we're doing some kind of discovery, because there's always some questions that need to be asked just in order to really have the conversation in general. I'd say one of the primary ones is, can you walk down to your network administrator's office with a cup of coffee and have a conversation? do you guys have an open relationship in that way that you can have a conversation about what you would like to do with AV over IP? Are they skilled enough? Are they willing to do this? Are they willing to put in place the policies that manufacturers need for their products to operate? So that's one of those things. Do you have a great relationship with your IT team? Because if AV and IT never communicate, you're going to have some really large barrier to entry into this if you want a converged network. And so that's one of the tipping points where we decide, hey, one of the lower barriers is that we get you an islands network and we connect your processor or your point of gateway to that AV network. We connect that singularly to the campus LAN so that you can monitor that system, but you're not spewing multicast or other broadcasts onto the converged network. So that's a big one. The relationship is a big one. And then another conversation is, do you know what infrastructure you have in place? Because if a college is entirely software-defined architecture, if the control plane of that network is pulled out of band, there comes an issue where we want to configure the network for, say, an individual set of switches, and software-defined architecture where the control plane doesn't exist in plane can become a real burden, because we need individual configuration for that switch, and that's a little bit it's not as easy to do that in that architecture. Still possible, but harder. So those are two of my big ones. And then we always have to ask, well, where are you going to place the product? Do you actually have an edge switch in each space, or are you home running? My favorite is home running to an IDF, where that switching hardware, the actual switch, exists in a secured room, a cooled room, one with ideally UPS in place, so that network stays up, that network is robust enough for this solution. Because what we want to try to avoid is, one network outage taking out all classrooms. So that's obviously one of those risks that we have to look at when we're looking at the solution. But again, one of those questions that I ask. There's a few more, but we won't get too in the weeds there.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. That's really, really good info. So I have a question for each of our panelists that's kind of a follow-up, but I want to switch up the order. So we're going to skip ahead to Mike at Iowa State. You'd mentioned the Performing Arts Center. I assume the venue that we saw that had the really neat balconies and the stage with the piano and everything. One of the I guess performance specification that people weigh when they're looking at AV over IP is latency. And if things are real time, have you learned any lessons about latency by doing AV over IP through the network compared to what you would have done with traditional systems and direct cabling and everything else? Were there special challenges to that facility that you didn't encounter in an average classroom? And you, sir, are muted now.
So to clarify, the facility I'm talking about is it's the Stark Performance Center. It's athletic performance, not like
it wasn't the
strength and agility.
Okay.
So it's like football locker rooms and some of the other locker rooms and big old dining center for all athletes, right? So it's
okay.
It's an athletics facility, is what it is. So we actually haven't. So to answer your question, we have not yet done any AV over IP where we're going to have like IMAG or anything where we're going to need to really make sure that we've got lip sync and and some things along those lines with the system.
Okay.
So yeah, we haven't done that yet.
Sure.
And those are some of the reasons why we haven't done that yet, right? We're continuing to be concerned about what would that look like, right? So yeah.
So let's pivot then. We'll go back to Jonathan, can you speak to applications where AV over IP might not be the right answer when you've got those, fast turnaround, Genlock, Studio, all of that world of things? When isn't it the right answer?
Yeah, great question. So I've actually seen this in real life with a global entity. They had multiple auditoriums on their basic network. Really, they had one VLAN, one subnet that they created, but there was no priority set in place for this network. Good switching hardware, high quality switching hardware, but no priority for this giant Dante / AES67 / video / all these things, right? So in that case, we started to have some issues. Well, we had to change some configurations on product, but the network we found was still just a little too latent for the timing, the clocks that we were talking about. And this customer had a GPS-enabled time or word clock in place to provide that network with a clock, and we still had some issues. So I made the suggestion that for this network, we really need to place some QoS in place for what they're looking for, because they do have data on the same network. Again, robust network, but had some issues. So here's my view. A dedicated style of network that needs that kind of falls outside of what the networking team is even capable of supporting, that warrants and especially when it's specialty, like lighting, like this IMAG, like these things that require massive amounts of bandwidth or throughput. That's where there's a great delineation where you say, you know what, we need separate infrastructure. I would not necessarily recommend putting that kind of solution on a campus LAN. I would, at the very least, I would ask for some kind of routed interface or gateway if you need access to the greater network. That would be the biggest thing that I would ask for. Otherwise, totally separate LAN and some kind of additional way to get to it from your campus LAN, like a computer that has dual NICs and you use some sort of RDP session, something like that.
Sure. All right, great. So we'll go back to Rhode Island next. Jeff, you mentioned you don't have AV over IP everywhere, but it's the only thing that you're doing for new installs. Like that is the way forward, and eventually everything old will get phased out and be replaced by this. Can you tell us about what that means for you from budgeting and total cost of ownership and planning capital projects? I mean, sometimes an AV over IP solution is untenable because of the cost. Other times it can save it for you. How have you found yourself in that balance?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because I've been asked that before about especially the financial aspect of this, and something I've noticed as I'm going forward is it's hard. You want to compare apples to apples when you're talking about, oh, I'm redoing a new room, I'm putting AV over IP in here. But I always want to make sure, like, apples to apples. So the same function I had before this to the same function of the new system, I don't really have that much of a cost difference. But if we want to talk about all the new features I'm adding in, yeah, that's going to add a little bit more and make the cost a little bit more expensive. So what we've been actually doing, I've been actually doing a lot of, I'm going to say, prep work to these spaces before we even go to AV over IP. I've done some of the prep work ahead of time. Some of these spaces, oh, my old network switch that was running my very simple system died. Cool, you're getting my new Netgear switch. So I am ready for AV over IP in there. So I'm just spreading out the cost ahead of time. So it's actually, we're still doing the same amount of rooms every year when I have my full budget,
Okay.
if not a little bit more. And because it's so modular too, if I have extra parts, eventually if I save enough extra parts, I can actually do a whole extra room for no cost. So
It's a good place to be in.
yeah. So yeah, in terms of budget, we're still right on track. As funny as you're mentioning that, there's my work group message is blowing up right now talking about budget and what we're going to be doing the next few years. So as you asked that, I look over and here we are. We're running. They're running through that right now. So
Wow.
good
So
timing.
just a quick aside on the same topic, has the modularity of this kind of a system changed what your refresh plan is like? Do you let anything go a little bit longer because you know that you can just swap out one module and stretch your funds a little bit further over the calendar?
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna run these as long as I can at this point until I really start to notice a massive failure rate. We're stretching these out. Um, and the good news too is because you or I, we do our own installs, we do our own programming, like we do it all in house. So if it is a modular switch to, oh, here's a new part, I need to change the program up a little bit, we can do that in house. So it's not a massive lift for us.
Gotcha. Okay. So, yeah, Raj, I was going to go to you next, and I was going to ask about you mentioning the team being spread thin and resource allocation and things like that. Is that the same segue that you were about to speak about?
Yeah, actually, that's a great point, Jim. I wanted to add to something what Jeff said too, with regards to cost. My whole thing always also is that there's two types of costs, right? There's a cost of doing something and a cost of not doing something. There's the opportunity cost. So for us, the justification that we usually provide is that yes, I mean, the reason why we go this way is because we want to avoid pitfalls of our organization not knowing assets in terms of where they're at, what their capability is, and what are they doing. Because especially in this day and age of vulnerabilities, it keeps everybody honest. You know what I'm saying? The best way to do things right is to do it in the open. So with AV over IP, it being on the network, I mean, a lot of the security policies and things like that that get applied across the board to an organization like IT gets applied to our devices too. And that's a way we can then work with our manufacturers and keep them honest too in terms of capabilities that are there. Like Mike said, I mean, he had to request firmware updates. Things that can languish for a while if there's an urgency to that because of criticality of failure. I mean, those are going to be, so to me, I think that's a cost, that's a hidden cost, that's a gain almost that we don't quite see. But I think from a security standpoint and a CIO standpoint, they definitely appreciate that. And going back to your question about, teams being thin and sense being spread out thin, I mean, that's been a challenge, what I'm saying, because one of the things that's been an issue for us is that, we have leveled up in terms of what we can and cannot do in terms of AV over IP internally. Spaces that we don't have the bandwidth to support because based on the critical nature, maybe they're not as critical, but they still need something like that. We rely on our partners or third-party integration firms. So there've been some challenges with that, what I'm saying, coordinating that, facilitating that, understanding that, because traditional AV integration firms are not usually very comfortable when it comes to deployment of IP-enabled AV devices. And that's where some of the challenges we've encountered. And even let's say we bring on a new team member, what I'm saying, and having them to be trained up on the best practices of AV over IP is a whole different skill set and mindset, right?
Mm-hmm.
One thing I always like to talk about is when you look at AV over IP and IT, I mean, traditional AV, as I've said before, is a very bottom-up approach. You look at a room, I have a device, I have a display, I have a microphone, where traditional IT is a top-down approach, right? I have an enterprise, these are the spaces I have. So with AV over IP, you have to kind of take that mentality and go top-down. You have to make sure that, your systems are scalable. You have to design it from the ground up to do so. So that way you can minimize your cost that it comes when it comes to having people or staffing issues, right? Now, if I want to do firmware upgrade, I'm not having to walk around with a laptop to every room and connect it and do a firmware upgrade. I can just push it out from a centralized location. So I think that top-down approach and thinking is critical. And then the other thing also is that the AV over IP, like I said, there's nowhere to hide. I mean, right? I mean, everything is visible. Everything's on the network. So things like data hygiene becomes a big thing. I mean, firmware upgrades, IP addressing DNS entries, you know what I'm saying, in terms of port mapping, making sure that, you know, you're connecting these devices that are AV over IP into the network. They have multiple MAC addresses. And as you, all of you know, usually the first thing a sysadmin would do or a network admin would do, they would disable that port because of port mapping or anything else. So having that plan in place. So usually, I mean, the work has to be done up front for you to scale out. And that's one way we have been able to scale out because we have tried to templatize this as much as we can because again, with resource constraints, there's only so much we can do. But AV over IP has allowed us to do a lot more because one thing that it allows us to do proactively is also monitoring. I mean, so kind of speaking about proactive maintenance, right? So we have to go away from being reactive to being proactive. And if you can see what you want to maintain, then how are you going to address it at that point? So that way, AV IP has been critical. I mean, huge for us. I mean, everything is online. Even our projectors are online. They're on. They have an IP address. They're connected to the network. We're monitoring those as well. And a lot of times we'll come up with random errors that we'll encounter that are manufacturers will be like, well, we've never heard of that before. But I'm like, well, how many projectors are connected to the network where somebody's monitoring the errors that are coming up, right? I mean, usually people turn them on and then they run for 5 years, 6 years, and then they'll outlast the usefulness and then they get decommissioned at that point.
It works till you add projector number 257. That's the limit.
Exactly.
Hey, Mike, yeah, Raj brought up a great point as far as maintenance. The response of your team to maintain these facilities, has that gotten easier, harder?
Well, yeah, I have a whole lot of thoughts on what Raj was saying there. You know, I'd make a few arguments here, right? I think the vast majority of us are putting almost all of our control on the network, right? So when you're talking about monitoring, understanding, you know, the status of things, you don't have to send your audio and video over the network to have a really good monitoring and status and remote login and, you know, be able to check on things, right? So, and if you want to talk security, I would argue that, you know, very few things are more secure than HTTP. It's a point to point, nobody can get in between, and it just always works, right? And so, yeah, I think there are definitely use cases for AV over IP, but I don't know if it's again, most of our standard classroom builds are still traditional HT-based, right? Now, everything is networked from a control monitoring perspective, but from an audio and visual distribution perspective, it's still in a much more traditional model. And so, you know, I would say, you know, to go back to answer your question, Steve, you know, I would say, well, first of all, athletics secure their own stuff, so that really doesn't impact us. As far as the Student Innovation Center, you know, I would say it's about the same, right? As far as the number of like trouble calls and roles that we have to do, I'd say no significantly noticeable difference in the AV over IP solution that we have versus our traditional solutions. So,
if I could add one thing to that, hey, sorry, Steve. One thing to that. That's a really great question, or not question, point, Mike. Is that I have this conversation often. HT-based T and local AV still has its place. I totally do believe that. If you're trying to access the data, if you're trying to access what the room's doing, choosing whatever solution it is, a processor that is able to gather data from those endpoints, say, and that goes into choosing, say, the right HT-based T endpoints or other endpoints like your displays and whatever else, being able to gather data from those AV products and bring that data into a processor that then you can monitor from that location or for that space, that's totally valid, because an AV over IP encoder and decoder for a tiny conference room might not make sense. So there's always that aspect, and I do believe that.
you know, I would strongly argue if the audio and video do not need to leave the room for any reason, I'm to this day, I'm gonna be hard pressed for anyone to make a valid argument why that room needs to be AV over IP with audio and video distribution, right?
With a switch in a different room, at least.
Right. You know, And
Well,
so
what
now,
about
it,
an encoder is an encoder is an encoder, right? So if you have a failure somewhere on an AV over IP, you have spare encoders. You can spin that up pretty quickly. Unless you standardize on a switch, switches might be different. Inputs and outputs might be different for that local room.
well, we're fairly standardized on, HD-based switching, right? There's probably 4 models that cover 99% of everything that we do. We know what models are where, so we need to roll, and we keep plenty of stock, shelf stock, right? And again, I would argue HD-based T, almost fewer parts, right? We're running directly into a projector. There's no receiver at the projector, right? So that's actually one less point of failure. When AV over IP, when we choose to standardize AV over IP as an industry, good luck with that. And then like display manufacturers and projector manufacturers can actually build that in. That becomes a different, that becomes different calculus, right? So yeah,
Yeah. Change is the only constant. That's the
right.
case. So, Jonathan, I wanted to ask you, a lot of the schools on this call, one of the biggest challenges that they face is, being a partner with their networking team and being able to have those conversations. From an integrator's perspective, they're removed from that an additional step. And from a manufacturer's perspective, you're even further from that away from the networking team. So how do you build those relationships and get those conversations started uh, in a situation like that where you don't have a built-in relationship?
Yeah, so that's something I deal with on a, I would say, a pretty constant basis. So sometimes it really does require a SME or a subject matter expert for the technology, or even for that the technology that we're talking about. So maybe it's a manufacturer SME, maybe it is a just an industry SME, and honestly, you should try to choose integrators that have this kind of that have this kind of knowledge in house, right? So your integrator should have a lot of the knowledge that we're talking about, because they need to know how to integrate these things properly. Throwing things on a VLAN is not an answer. That's not the answer to what we're talking about here. There's a lot more nuance to it than just spinning up a VLAN, something like that. The kind of verbiage. So what I see is sometimes it takes the integrator, the stakeholders of the school, and a SME, whoever that may be, getting on a 30-minute call and discussing what the risks are. So it's usually risk assessment that we have to talk about. And so like I come across the situation where users or schools are not allowed to have edge switches in the system. They're not allowed to have any other switch in the room, but they're wanting to go down this road. So IT has put them in a place, and the way I view it is that if IT is putting them in the place and the technology that they want to implement requires the network, there needs to be some compromise. And what I find is if we can get the right people in the room and have even if it's a quick conversation, we can figure out if this is going to work or if it's not going to work. And that can save a lot of headache when, someone randomly plugs in some encoders and decoders to a network and takes down a network without knowing what they're doing. So again, lots of weeds there, but that's one of those things, is making sure that the right people get in the right place, in the right meeting.
That's really good insight. Thank you. So one of the other questions that I wanted to ask and find out more about, right now, if somebody says AV over IP, we all have an idea of what we think that looks like, right? You're doing encoders, it goes to a network switch, you're doing decoders that are being fed by it, and that's the system, right? There's multiple embodiments. Earlier it was mentioned, if you're doing HD-based T and some other technologies, the receiver is built into the display device. What kinds of new devices do you see coming out in the next couple of years? Are we going to have AV over IP transmitters built into our laptops and cameras and things like that? And are we going to have different flavors of receivers built into our projectors and displays, or do you think it's going to stay in this transmit receive kind of mode for system design in the next few years? This could be anybody, but Jonathan or Steve, if you've got specifics, what's your hunch at least?
So one of my thoughts about this, and this, I think this has been a huge conversation, is that black boxes are starting to become a thing of the past. Black boxes that we don't know what happens inside that little black box are falling out of favor. So my view and the way that I kind of see this shifting is to software. Is that the generation and the encode and decode of this actually happens more at a OS or software level versus just a black box that does something. So it's going to be a few more years before we see this implemented, but to me, that's one of the things that I see. And if you think about it, there is a lot of advantage here where your compute that you're actually, so this is take your conferencing applications, it makes a lot of sense to use either cloud computing or on-prem computing to access computing resources. Well, the data, that data center could be the place that you actually find the encode of a video and audio stream, potentially. And so that's delivered to the room over a software stream, some kind of encode and decode from that place to the room, and vice versa. So again, that's one of the insights that I see.
Yeah, I think problem is for AV, when you're starting to talk about how many displays, we're in the hundreds or thousands, right? So not the millions. And I think that's what we saw with the Harman Samsung acquisition, when I thought that would come quicker than it did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It's going to be interesting because too, from a software perspective, the codecs that we're talking about, we're getting really, really good at getting high quality video to and from a place with a pretty small amount of data in relative terms, of 110 plus gig networking. So those things, I think the barrier is going to start to move away as products introduce more standardized just methods of video transport. So I do see some of that when you're talking about AV over IP.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this whole thing, and I kind of mentioned earlier, the whole thing hinges on, will the AV industry choose to get together and stop the manufacturer-specific stuff and choose a standardized protocol, probably from some third-party standards organization, IEEE or something like that, is universally recognized, and come behind that. And if we can get that done, then the world is your oyster, right? Because then laptop manufacturers can build that into the network ports on their laptops, right? And display manufacturers and projector manufacturers can build that into the network ports on their devices. That's the direction that, Lord willing, that's the direction this whole thing is going to go. But I think we're still a few years out from that, right? But if you think about where we're at with consumer, which sometimes leads where we're going with the pro AV side. How many of us have TVs now with no connections except power, right? It's Wi-Fi. You're streaming all your content. There's no HDMI connections on the thing at all. So that's where the consumer market's headed. And I think that's where we could head to if we just got our act together as an industry and standardize on an AV over IP protocol, and then we could build that into everything, have single connections, a single wired network connection to every device, power, information, audio, video, all on a single connection. That's where we need to be.
I was kind of hoping that the industry would rally, if you will, and we'd kind of consolidate and reduce the number of different flavors of this that existed. And what I noticed this year at Infocom, XYZ manufacturer, you go to somebody's booth and check it out, they had more flavors. And to Jonathan's point earlier, that really this is a box with some connections on it, but the product is that compute power and the ability to transceive through the network. My feeling after going through everything at Infocom and seeing that kind of branch even further is that we're going to be picking what flavor of input or output we have based on the application. And this is fine. Let's do that as NDI. But here we've got a critical application. We're going to need SDVOE here. And I don't know. I wonder if we're going to see systems that have multiple flavors to them, and we're just picking which one is appropriate to that application and that use case on a local basis or room by room basis, or even an input by input basis.
I think the same still applies here. So that's a great point, Jim. So I think the same thing still applies here, is that as more of those standards, let's use big quotes, right? More of those standards start to become more standard. Is that they're going to be put on a network, right? And if it's standard IP networking, packet delivery that we're talking about mainly here, is that maybe the computing power of the transmitting device and the receiving device allows for some type of transcoding from one codec or one standard to another. Again, I do see that as way far in the future, but a product that goes up to display some information, well, maybe that product has the ability to, it just has the computing power to receive multiple types of streams. And maybe, I think that could be something that we see. Speculation on my part. Tin hat, right? Tin hat.
It'll come full circle, Jonathan. It'll be two boxes with an HDMI cable in the middle.
It could be. It could be. It's funny you say that, because I've had this conversation a couple of times. I mean, at its base, what is a DisplayPort connection and what is an HDMI connection? It's a data flow. That's really what it is. There's data happening in between, but one pathway, one of those data streams is massive, and then the TXRX between those two products is small. But one way, like HDMI, it's mostly a data software stream, or I shouldn't say a software stream, but there's a data stream occurring between that transmitting device and that receiving device.
Yeah.
Jim, as far as with that, I agree with Jonathan, and I do have an opinion on this matter.
Please.
Feel that in AV over IP, in the AV industry, at least the industry that we're part of, we're not going to have a standard that's going to be there, that's going to be common. And the reason being is that if past has been any indication of future, AV industry traditionally has always adopted whatever the popular consumer standard is, whether it's HDMI, whether it's DisplayPort. So yeah. I don't believe the AV industry is going to adopt. I mean, but they're going to agree on a standard. There's going to be a standard that's going to be enforced from the consumer side onto the AV industry, kind of like what we saw with a lot of different things with adapters and USB-C and HDMI and things like that. Now, the broadcast side of AV or IP might be different. The broadcast side there might be something like IEEE standard that's SMPTE 2110 that is industry-wide organization that's supporting it, that they can come to that. But on the AV side, I believe we're going to adopt something that's going to be a future iteration of H.267 or AV2 or something else. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's where it's going to go. That's just a controversial opinion on my...
It's not too controversial.
AES 67V for video.
Right. So I want to ask one more real question, and then I want to do just a lightning round if we've got the time for it still. And I will give all of the credit in the world to Bill Heydrich for this, actually. How do you see artificial intelligence changing what we do in AV over IP in the future?
I see that as something that's already becoming a thing. I really do, because analyzing a frame of video for what's changed, I think is going to, for what's changed versus what we're trying to send, those kinds of things. Codecs already
Interframe
do that.
compression.
Right. So we're already doing that with a codec, but that uses a set algorithm to do so. Maybe AI finds a way to send that data in a much more compressed way without actually reducing the quality. So I do think AI in the compression of video and decompression of video, I really do see that as something we'll see in the future. Used in a small format, right? I don't think ChatGPT is going to be sending some video to you anytime soon, but using a language model that is designed for that purpose, yes, I do see that coming.
Yeah, no, I agree, Jonathan. I mean, for me, like what I see AI, AV over IP, is quality of life improvements, right? So a lot of things in terms of, from our users, in terms of like compression is a great example, audio is a great example. So what they see, what they hear, what they experience, there might be improvements in that they may not even notice. I do see some application for AI with regards to the other side of it, which is for us as folks who maintain these systems, there might be some advantages to that as well in terms of deploying systems being able to respond to failure in a little bit way. I mean, we do it manually right now with scripting. We do it manually right now with some basic automation. There might be some additional layer of automation that's one step above that, taking decisions based on things that are happening, whether there's jitter or in the camera, you see there's something going on. A lot of those actions are basic. So I do see some quality of life improvement with AI, and I'm really excited to see and learn what types of things I see that's embedded within the workflow already right now. That's my take on it. I mean, of course, there'll be other things with things like ChatGPT and users creating amazing things, but from our point of view in the world, I mean, that's where I see the big improvements for at least for us.
I mean, look at it from an IT perspective. Some of the best firewall technologies out there employ AI, because what it's doing is looking at what's changed and what is expected of the network. And if those things deviate, it's hard for humans to see the billions of packets that are moving around a network, if not trillions, if that's what we're being honest about, of packets moving in around the network. But a model that's trained on that kind of thing can probably spot issues a lot faster, than a human can. So just from the monitoring perspective alone, and maybe that AI model is running on local hardware, and its sole job is to look for problems. I see that as a great tool that I hope to see implemented soon.
Yeah, I would concur with that, right? The horrible misuse of the term AI notwithstanding.
Right.
If we reference it again, as I would typically want to reference it as advanced automation or highly advanced automation, right? I think this is the direction where we're headed, right? As far as for me, the first big thing will be self-healing, right? It'll identify the problem. Hey, you've got this, networked PDU, said device obviously needs a reboot. It's going to reboot it without you even having to know that the problem existed, and it's going to solve itself before a ticket even shows up, right? These are the types of things that as I'm looking ahead, that's the kind of thing this highly advanced automation is going to first real entry into what we're doing here in AV world.
An exciting future. So I wanted to go through just one quick answer from each of you. What's the most unexpected thing that you learned about AV over IP when you did this? What didn't you know that you didn't know at the beginning that would be a great lesson learned for anybody who's entertaining it now? And we'll go first with Jeff, I guess.
As I'm trying to think through everything we've done, and I think a lot of mine is going to be because we're setting up our own network switches, is the networking side. of life. That tends to be where our biggest hiccup is. It's also where our students tend to have a little bit of issues now, because with the old HD-based T systems, if there's an HD-based T issue, cool, I can send a student to go do that. But if it's a AV over IP system and there's a network issue, I can't quite send a college student to go handle that. My student employees, that's just beyond what they can do. They can unplug and replug it. Half the time that works, but not necessarily. So it really is that network side of things, and how do we want our students to handle these kinds of issues? So probably that's kind of our biggest lesson learned right now. We're still trying to work our way through that and what makes the most sense.
All right. Raj, what did you think was the most unexpected, unknown that others can learn from?
Yeah, I think the biggest unknown and unexpected thing for us when we deployed AV over IP was the amount of stress testing that we have to do with our systems before it's deployed. When you look at traditional HD-based or traditional AV, your variables are very controllable, right? And when you look at AV over IP, there's a lot of unknown. There could be a different model of switch. It could be Cisco, Aruba, types of VLAN. So the stress testing part was a surprising part. Once we got that down, then it was easy from there. But that's one thing that took us by surprise. And one thing I always tell people is to make sure you stress test your system before you roll it out in a deployment.
All right. And then Mike, you get the last word on today's call.
What
did you not know that others should?
I guess I would say it's kind of a corollary to what Raj said. I guess the thing that surprised me, when we first did this is, honestly, if you configure your network properly, how robust it is, right? Like networks do not have to be fragile. Where, you add a little bit of bandwidth, the whole thing's going to crash, right? If you really configure your network well, they can really be robust and take a lot of, a
lot of video
action. Yeah, right. So,
no, that is a really, really good note to end it on. Actually, full story arc from problems to solutions. So I guess on behalf of the AV over IP task force, which Steve and Jeff have been on with me, and a few others, done a series for a whole year. It started on Mike's campus at Iowa State last year in Ames, and we're turning off the light after this. This is the end of our commission to do this, and we'll see everybody in 2 weeks at NC State for the annual conference. Can't wait.
Yeah, feel free to send in ideas for next year. What topic should we cover next?
Yeah. So thanks everybody for your time and attention. Thanks for everybody that participated and helped, and hope this has added value and done you a service. So take care and see you in person soon.
See you soon.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.